Welcome to B2B Tech Mindset, where we explore how technology drives business success. Join us as we discuss the latest software solutions, trends, and strategies that can help you stay ahead of the curve. Develop a tech mindset and learn how to leverage technology for growth in your organization.
Welcome to another episode of the B2B Tech Mindset. Today we have a very interesting topic for your organization if you want to leverage technology. On that is staffing. So what kind of employees, what kind of people, and what knowledge and skills have those people to have if you want to move forward with your business using technology.
In regards to staffing, I have an idea that I think is slightly controversial. Slightly. I wouldn't say that it's extremely controversial, but I consider that. So let me bring this very quickly to a point. The main idea is that the technology cycles are very short, right? And by the technology cycles being that short, we are being faced with a fundamental problem. And the problem is that every 3-4 years, the whole cycle is being resetted. Meaning that if you bring someone who is junior, there is a good chance that in 2-3 years, if this person is working in this technology continuously, it's going to have a pretty close level to someone who was working in technology for the last 20 years. Let me give you one simple example. We have people working with Kubernetes these days. Almost everyone uses Kubernetes these days. But it's been perhaps 5 years that Kubernetes became the de facto standard, so slowly became the de facto standard. I recall when I was still working at Telefonica that Kubernetes was beginning. So people were exploring solutions to have orchestration of containers. So it was not established. Right now, being an engineer that uses Kubernetes as their main tool to bring websites up is a fundamental skill. It's a must. You need to have that if you are working in a professional software web development environment. So it means that the head start that an engineer had that was perhaps working 10 years before containers and Kubernetes in web development is gone after 5 years. Someone who began 5 years ago and an engineer that began 15 years ago, today have more or less the same level of skill. Of course, there is skills that they build on top of each other. You know, if you have experience with...
You mean, sorry to interrupt, but you mean technical skill in the newest thing, in the new technology.
Yeah. So there are things that never change. There are things that never change in software engineering, for instance, things like software architecture, like the basics. There are design patterns or network topology. There are certain things that never change. Strategies to make your online databases, your operative databases to work in a more efficient way. There are things that don't change over time. So you can benefit from that experience if you've been working in that environment for many years. But in general, every 5-6 years come a paradigm that change everything or change in a dramatic way things. So the 15-20 years experience that an engineer might have is just on paper, because in reality, an engineer that only have 5 years of experience might be really head-to-head with someone who has much more time in the industry. Of course, again, architecture, perhaps the basics of computer science, data structure, algorithms, these kind of things, they don't change, they are invariant. This other person might have seen more, depends on the industry. But to be honest, more than 3 years, I don't think is relevant in terms of experience. And why I'm bringing this in this conversation about staffing, Because many people, when they are trying to hire talent in the space of technology, they are looking for someone who is a super senior. This person needs to have 10 years of experience in technology X. And the question is, do you really need that? Do you really need that, knowing that the technology cycles are going so fast? That's my main point. That's the core point of my proposition today.
Yeah, I have a couple of counters to that. So the first one is the world you're describing is like your company is able, or the hypothetical company you're talking about is able to keep on top of the technology. Always use the latest stuff every 3 years, like Kubernetes and whatever. The reality is, once you have something running, a product running, it's very difficult to diverge and incorporate different technologies to that product, unless you have to do it for whatever reason. But it's very difficult to change course once the train is running. So that's one thing. That means that if you, back in the day, you remember, like, everybody was doing stuff in PHP. After that, the thing was Ruby on Rails. At the beginning of my work here in Germany, I was doing like front end using HTML style sheet, which was a technology totally new for me back then. But nobody was using it back in the day. On that change in the same company, that changed for a couple of reasons to a different technology. But usually, if you have a running product, you need people that work in the technology stack that you have, and you need people that have experience with that kind of problem, depending on the size of your product. If your product is pretty big, you need people who actually can write like solid code that doesn't break every 5 minutes, or otherwise they cost money. If you have to reboot the instance every 5 minutes because it's an error or whatever. So that being said, in those kind of organization, the cycle tend to be a little bit longer. You mentioned 3 years, like at the beginning. I will say conservatively 5 to 7 years. You can introduce a new technology, or you can change the stack, or you can change something in a product without it, not without a big investment. Is because they change, or the return that you're gonna get in the change will actually be bigger than staying with the current technology. So that is the question. If making the change to the new technology will make you faster, flexible, or performant, then people will consider to make the change. Otherwise, they will stick to their old stack, on the old product. They will stay there. So that's one of my contrasts to your theory. Nevertheless, in a very tech company, they will change every 3 years. That's true. And they will use the latest and greatest for whatever.
The question that I have is how defensible the business model is. If the business model of that organization that has a slower modernization cycle than, say, other technology companies that have a much accelerated, much faster cycle, if the business model they have is defensible, if they have a moat that is defensible, no one can get inside, it's based on some unique knowledge that I have, or some special relationships that I build with my customers or with my partner ecosystem, then I would say, well, yeah, probably yes. Probably you have the luxury of saying, you know what, I can relax, and I want to have an environment that I can make sure that the people that is working in the product, in the technology, stay a long time here, and I train them over time, because I have a very defensible product in an environment that is not too aggressive. But if that's not the case, and I think today we live in a world that we can use this phrase of technology, software is eating all businesses. And if you are in a space that can be disrupted by technology, either because the price point is dramatically reduced, because it's much faster, the results you're getting are much better, for whatever reason, then I do think there is a genuine reason to go to a faster pacing, to a rhythm that has a much faster pace. You see it even in the kind of technologies that are rising right now. There's a lot of companies who are heavily investing in DevOps. If you invest in DevOps, it's because you are aware that the release cycles, and this is connected to the conversation we had last week about Agile, it's because your release cycles are much shorter. It's because you are aware and you have the framework and the platform in place, so you can switch technology and you can roll back changes and try new things and modify things as they go. So I think in this new environment that software is being built, probably makes sense that whole idea that my product is not going to change for the next 5-7 years. I mean, I know companies that have software that is being running since the 90s. You know?
Yeah, I mean,
I know companies
you can only
they're making
you can
really
only
good money.
see the sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, they're making really great money with software that they wrote in the 90s, and that's fine. But it's because they have landed in a niche that they are not visible. Or again, because they have this mode, not because the technology is great, but because they build the relationships, they know the right people, they made the right connections. And then you can say, well, you know, this is feasible. I keep my head down and no one knows that I'm making a bunch of money. But if you don't?
Well, there are a couple of other businesses that they are still using ancient technology. By ancient, I mean really ancient, like hotel booking system are still running on mainframes. Airline software, like booking software, still running on mainframe. Bank system, international banking system still runs in mainframes. So
but all those examples have a mode. They have a regulatory environment. You just cannot make a bank, or you just cannot build an airport. Those are modes. You can defend that thing. But if you are not in one of those,
no, but I mean the software that runs the banks, like deep down, is on one mainframe, like running all the transactions.
It could be COBOL or Fortran.
Yeah, exactly. Fortran.
And then you have someone who can work in the same code base for 20 years. But again,
yes,
that's possible because banks is a very regulated industry that is not easy to disrupt. But most of the business do not operate in those environments that are not easily disrupted. They work in environments that you can really come with innovation. And even in finance, you see a lot of people working in fintech, trying to disrupt that industry. And of course, there is the whole limitation of, regulations and all those things. And then in those environments, especially when new hires are being made with new technologies. I mean, you see some companies. I recall when we were getting started in the job market, it was very funny because you see that the technology came about 3 years ago, and still someone is being looked for that has 8 years of experience with this. Which basically, which basically shows you that the person who wrote that thing doesn't have a clue about the longevity of the technology. And that being put aside, aside.
Yeah. Well, that is a nice segue to hiring. Since we are talking of staffing, I think we took a weird term like to start the conversation, but let's start with hiring, which is the first stuff of the staffing. So definitely, if you have a business, you need to have at least one person who is like taking care of hiring other people for your business. Usually that person should have a set of skill, have to know people, have to be able to judge people, have to know the business is the second one, and also have to know a little bit of what the job offer, like what these people will do in the company, or what is at least what is expected from them to when they get hired to do that. Unfortunately, nowadays, at least my experience, all the recruiters that I cross my paths weekly, they have no clue what they are recruiting for. Most of them.
Well, most of them have a list of keywords, and if one
Yeah.
keyword matches your profile, then they will ping you, because they are not a specialist in the software industry. I think that's one of the main problems when third-party recruiters. I'm not batching on them. Some of them are good, and some of them take the time to really get to know the candidate and understand what the position is. But in general, many of them, what they do is keyword research, and if they see that you match that, they will contact you, which probably, as we were discussing before we began to record, if you use something like a chat GPT or a GPT model, you might get a much better recommendation and a much better follow-up process using a bot that actually using a human being, because the bot can have a much better understanding of what do I really need as an employer. Yeah. So
Yeah.
but yeah, many of them just simply go through that process. And then the other thing, I think one aspect that is important when people is looking for talent is to understand how immediate they need to have this person to be at full speed. If you have enough time if you have the luxury to train your employee, then perhaps you might even think, if you really want to consider hiring for core qualities, and core qualities for me is, for instance, the ability to learn instead of the amount of knowledge this person has. Because if you say, if you have the possibility to say, you know what, I can train you, and in 6 months, I need you to be at top speed or at medium speed in 6 months, then basically it's not that important that you know all the wealth or all the portfolio of technologies that we are using. You can learn, and then I'm only interested for your abilities to learn, but then you will have to come up with a set of tests that measure for that.
Yeah.
Which is different from what you usually have in most job interviews that try to cover what you already know. So it's like a catalog. You're being asked catalog questions. Give me, you know, what APIs or what algorithm would you use for this, or then you have like a math trick, you know, or some kind of like a problem that you have to solve to show that you can. Yeah.
A puzzle. They will give you a puzzle.
Yeah, you try to solve a puzzle, and that doesn't show that you can learn really fast.
No, it doesn't.
It just shows your ability to solve puzzles. It's different. It's a different skill set.
Definitely.
It's a different skill set.
Yeah, from my also my experience, like some of the interviews they do where they put puzzle and stuff is like that's really BS.
Yeah, and then the other thing that is super important is that if you have time, then the academic background of the candidate is also not that important.
Yeah.
It's also not that important because I think it was a study, I think it was by Google, I'm not really that sure, that they saw that all candidates tend to perform the same within 2-3 years in a role, regardless of the school they went to. And that's a really, really interesting result. It would be interesting to find that and share that link. So that's one part of the question. The other part is, well, if you need the person to hit the ground and run right away, then it's a different situation. But then the question is, why don't you just hire a consultant? No, because sometimes it's very hard, very, very hard. Sometimes you spend 6 months, a year to find a candidate for a role, and you have countless job interviews. Whereas if you have a consultant, they just might come to the job, step back, and that's pretty much it. So I think making the decision in terms of the amount of time that you have until that person can be really up to speed is an important component in hiring and how you present the position and how you go about to find the right candidate.
Yeah. And also we are talking about the interview process. It's like there is no really a way to measure soft skills. Like the skill at the end of the day, you will be working with people, so you don't only need to be good at your job or your technology or your skills, but you need to have soft skills as well. So otherwise, usually end in a disaster if some part of the team or some team member doesn't work well with the rest of the team, in my opinion. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good one, because actually there are pretty good psychometric tests to measure that. Now, the question there is, first, in the jurisdiction where your company is that legal? Is that okay to run that kind of tests? That's number one, and make a hiring decision based on those tests, because there are many components that play a role into hiring. But there are definitely tests. I recall one. There is this website from Ray Dalio. The website is Principles U. That if you run that test, and I think it takes like 10 minutes. No, not 10 minutes, but like 30 minutes to run that test. And essentially, what you get afterwards is a really good profile about what role would you play in a team. Are you the creative? Are you the leader? Are you the person who needs to get instructions, but then follow those instructions to the very detail, and then tries to implement the things exactly as they have to be implemented? So there are ways to measure that. And there are also some other tests, psychological tests, that may measure things like these big 5 qualities of the personality traits. So there are many tests that can be used. The question is, in your jurisdiction, can you use them? If it's okay in the environment where you're doing it, and then you have the people to apply those tests to your candidates and to really have a good feeling for the quality of the selection that was done. Because it's non-trivial to apply one of these tests and evaluate what the result was. That's not a trivial thing. And I think what many people try to do instead is they come to these 360 degrees interviews where you have been introduced to the team. And so the team tries to get a good impression from you from 1-2 hours that you talk to them. And then you see if it's a fit or not. But to be honest, I don't know how effective that can be, because you are not seeing people under pressure, and people behave very differently if they know the stakes are high or not. So that's something that is a common practice. It's a common practice to bring people to a call and tell them, like, you know what, let's have a talk and see how it works, and let's get to know each other. But it's not, I don't think it's really that effective. And then the other thing is that, well, you have a probation side. At least in Europe, you have a probation time that might help you to sort of support or roll back that decision and say, well, you are not really like a good fit for the role. and or you identify that you yourself are not the right person for the role, so you decide, no, you know what, this is better to part ways, because this is not a relationship that is going to work for any of us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. A company that I was working in the past, a company doesn't exist anymore. We had like one step on the hiring was the beer test. Like, so was the questions
I wouldn't
like,
pass that one.
no, you don't actually have to drink beer at all. It's like, it was a question you ask yourself when you're hiring someone, if you will go with this person for a beer after work. If the answer is no, then you shouldn't hire it. So, because at the end of the day, you're going to spend more time working in the team that you spend at home with your family, probably. So that was one simple way to see if you like that person, if it's like in the same wavelength or whatever, then you can hire it. If something is not matching 100%, then you may reconsider.
That's an interesting criteria for choosing people, because sometimes there are roles that what you need is competence.
Sure.
You know, there are roles where you need competence and you need the best player possible, and then empathy and human relationships play a secondary role. There are roles in which you need someone who brings energy and brings together the team and plays the role of a leader, not a manager, but a leader, someone who can
motivate
like people,
move the people forward. Yeah,
exactly. So, but that person might not be the best technically.
Yes, sure.
So the question is, what do you need? What do you need for a role? And what can you tolerate? Because this is same as in physics when you're running an experiment. Is what is your error tolerance? You are always going to have error, and you know that there's always going to be variance in whatever metric you want to achieve. Now the question is, what is the amount of tolerance and variance that you are willing to accept in that particular case? And I think for hiring talent, that's critical. But now comes also another component in the equation, which is, at least in Europe and here in Germany particularly, is that there is not that many people. So the job market now is a complicated one in technology. So there is not an abundance of people willing to take a role, especially a technical role, with the skills that we need today, that are needed today. So if you are under those constraints, that you don't have a lot of choice to pick from, the question is, how you go about making a decision. And that's why I think in many instances, going after consultants or contractors that come, get the job done, and then step back might be a good idea.
Yeah, but only if you have a very clear, defined problem. Like if you are, okay, our website is not performing enough in the last months for whatever reason. We have accumulated a lot of data and now it's not performing enough for whatever reason. That is a very particular, well-defined problem. For that, you bring a consultant, they investigate, they realize what the problem is. Maybe they have to change some technology behind it. They fix it. That's it. The scope is finite, it's defined already beforehand. For those particular cases, having consultants is good, is one of the solutions. No questions about it. But for iterating on creating stuff continuously, like come up with new ideas about the product, like moving the product forward if you have a product, or moving the business forward if you have a business, combination of products and services or whatever. A consultant may not be the best solution, because they might not have skin in the game, like you say. Like if you have like fixed staff in your business, they have been there for a couple of months at least. They know the people, they know the culture, they like their job, hopefully. So they have a little bit more skin in the game. Like the consultant type is like, okay, I go in, I fix stuff, or I do stuff when I go out. So there is no long-term commitment or emotional commitment, if you want to call it that way.
That's true. And that's why I was making the differentiation at the beginning that if you are interested in the long-term vision, then probably you will want to go for a permanent hire. If you need to attend a pressing problem, then probably you want to go for the fastest solution, which is someone who comes, solves the problem, and then steps back. Yeah. However, that being said, there are some organizations that they have managed to build product and even operate product with external resources. I think an important part of that is just how disciplined the organization is. If this,
yeah, I have been in one of those organizations, unfortunately.
If it's very disciplined, it can work. I'm not saying from a business owner, from a leadership perspective, when you are running the business, that might work. The challenge is, how do you organize the team so it works in an effective manner? That to me is, do you have processes that well documented? Do you insist that documentation is going to be a key part of the software that is being produced? Are we using the standard ways of producing software so people can find themselves in those environments when new people come afterwards? So there needs to be discipline, and there have to be best practices in place to be able to run an operation in that form. But I don't think it's impossible. It's just, from a leadership perspective, there is the need to understand that this is what you have to select for. You need to select for people who is highly conscious about how they're building the work, and that they are going to make sure that is best class possible, and that people that come behind is going to do something with that. Not like one case that I recall, someone who didn't want to get fired, and then they named the code, all classes had vegetable names. So there was like the tomato class, orange class, and then there was no names that were related somehow with the domain.
What the class will do.
Yeah. So, and then you really need the guy, because because no one knew what onion was and what I don't know what salad was.
He was the only one who knew the map of the farm.
Exactly. So but that if you want to avoid that, you have to. You need to have certain ethics.
That's a funny example.
There's a funny example.
I also have experience with someone who also make themselves like how do you say wichtig?
Important.
Yeah, I might say important in the company. It's just to avoid getting layoff later on. But that didn't work pretty well, because at some point, like, they weren't that good. So people realized they weren't that good, so they were laid off anyway.
I mean, this is the fascinating thing. I read a book not long ago. It's the title is Systemology. So kudos to the author of the book. And this book is thought for organizations that are 100 people and below. So it's not for big organizations, it's 100 people and below, across all industries you can imagine. And essentially, the idea is to how you build processes for the whole organization. And the premise, the fundamental premise behind the book is that every single person in the organization, beginning with the owner of the organization, beginning with the founder of the company, should be replaceable. That's the goal. If you build an organization where you have processes documented in a way that everyone can be replaced, then you have found your sweet spot, you know, the holy grail of organizations, because it means that you have isolated yourself against risks, such as people leaving positions, a competitor, taking someone from you. So and then you can also, as an owner, you can just step back from business and hire, you know, an external CEO that might do the work for you. And so you can do something else. You can go into a different venture. So that would be the ideal scenario. Now, as an employee, that sounds a little bit frightening, because you know that your services, your abilities can be replaced.
You are expendable.
You're
basically
expendable. But at the same time, if you have been able to build an ecosystem, and a set of skills that makes you expendable, in the long term, in the market, that increases your value. Because everyone who is building a team or is hiring workforce that can really create value for their organization should be looking for people who is focused on creating not only a piece of software or a piece of product, but also delivering the product, the process that might help to actually keep that thing alive, no matter who is operating that piece of software, product, or service. So I think from that perspective, the ideal will be to hire people who is conscious of this situation, and they want to make themselves expendable. That would be the ideal thing, in my opinion, at least.
Well, it's not like they want to make themselves expendable per se. It's more like, I mean, that's a mindset that you have to have. So that was my mindset. That is still my mindset today. So I can leave my current company today, and tomorrow someone will come and I can be replaceable. So but that is only my mindset. So most of the people, they don't think that way. They think that they are irreplaceable. So that is basically,
at least they wish that they were.
Yeah, I wish they were that they were, but the truth is that everybody is replaceable. So sometimes some take more work than others. If you don't document your work, or you have a lot of, I don't know, so internal stuff that no other people know. But eventually, if something happens, you are let go, you have to go, or whatever, someone will figure it out. So life will go on anyway. So it doesn't matter. So for me, it's like being transparent as much as I can, and do the processes and the stuff I do in my day-to-day work, like without any secrecy or something like that. That for me is paramount. So I don't care if I can be replaced tomorrow. Where I make sure that I'm not replaced tomorrow is that the value that I bring to the company. And that is what people should focus in, the value that you are bringing to your company as an employee. What is the value that you're bringing to your company? Like, are you solving internal conflicts? Like, it's difficult to work with this team or the other team when you are working with them? Or are you generating a lot of ideas? Or are you simplifying processes? Or are you coming with solutions to problems that the company has? So that kind of value is what make you irreplaceable. If you have a lot of hidden stuff and nobody knows how you do your thing, at the end of the day, when you are not there, the people you are connecting with will be still there, when you can still talk with those people and figure out how you were doing stuff. So it's not rocket science, it's not black magic. So people will figure it out at the end of the day.
Yeah, people will figure it out, but there are different levels of pain. I've noticed that when things are well documented, then those transitions are easier. And especially something that I've also noticed is if everything, like if the processes are clear, it's much easier even if the leadership steps back, which is important sometimes, that they can just step back. Another thing that is important, and I think in regards to staffing, especially now that you were bringing that conversation in regards to is people replaceable, not replaceable, that you know the technology cycles, that things are changing pretty fast and you need to adapt to what is being done, is also to hire, and if to hire for resilience. And if not hiring for resilience is because might be there's people who has not developed that mental muscle just yet, at least to think in terms of how to improve resilience of the team over time. So that team is able to endure stress, and how to manage stress and endurance, how they can go about it without being burnt out. Because for some people, it's sometimes overwhelming when things are changing pretty fast. And of course, there are companies that they push forward a growth mindset in which people try to learn continuously. But there are many organizations where that's not the case. And people think, well, I can just stay in my little niche that I master or that I do, and I will do this for the next 20, 30 years. And then suddenly they are being confronted with a sad reality that no, that's not the case. The world is changing pretty fast. And some, especially in the space of technology, it was Satya Nadella who said that uh, this industry, so software, does not respect tradition, and that's important to keep in mind. I mean, it's not meant with the objective of make people feel depressed or anything, but it's just this is a very fast-pacing, changing environment, and for that the right mental attitude is necessary. And if when one is hiding, if one doesn't have the mechanism to measure how resilient, how adaptable to change people is, at least one or organizations should have a framework or a platform that enables people to learn to change and to deal with change in uh, a way that allows them to go through that in the long term, not only in the short term, so they get burned in 6 months changing things, but in the long term, they can still do things and they can still learn new things, and they feel motivated and they feel engaged in what they're doing.
Yeah, as you were saying, like resilience is like sometimes that I learned in my past companies, like if you have a team, like don't have only one guy who do all the DevOps or the architecture or whatever. Like have one main guy and another backup. Like it doesn't have to be as good as the main guy doing architecture or operations or whatever. But if something happen, like anybody can get hit by the bus tomorrow. So if something happened, you have a backup. Otherwise, if you have only one operations guy in the team, on something happens suddenly, that team probably will be set back like a couple of weeks because someone else have to figure out the operations part of the process. In the other hand, if you are able to kind of divide the task, like having the more capable one doing the main job, but also leaving some tasks to the second one, then you are in a flexible position to overcome any issue that you may encounter.
Yeah, that reminds me, also brings me back to the conversation we had last week regarding agile. Because if you bring certain agile practices, you will, as an organization, you will shield yourself against those changes. If you have, for instance, code reviews, anytime that someone makes a commitment, a commit to your source code base, then you will, if you have code reviews in place, if people is doing pair programming, these practices might help you to actually be resilient as an organization, as a team, against changes. And they might bring also transparency in terms of, oh, how do we build the software? What are the hidden components here and there? Why we make this architectural decision when we build this thing? Why we build it this way and not this way? So that helps. But again, all these things imply that you have strong processes in place. It demands that you have discipline, that when you have the discipline and you have the processes, then you can shield yourself against all these things. And then also as an individual, you know that you can go also to a different organization and then you will thrive because, well, you know all these things and you can help people to level up their game and not, try to be in the little corner trying to defend. So if you're someone who it's been working in an organization where you have all these practices, and then you switch and you go to a different place where people is trying to defend their little corners, and then you realize pretty fast what is going on there. And then you can make the decision, well, do I want to play under these rules or I don't want to play under these rules? So that, yeah, I think those are considerations. And it's interesting because it's in both directions. So I think in the state of affairs that we have today, companies are not only hiring employees, but also employees are hiring the companies. So it goes in both directions. Like you can smell, well, is this the right team that I want to work with? Is this the right technology? Is this just, vaporware? They're trying to paint things nicely. It's like when you see one of these, basically many job descriptions out there, where you've realized they're copy and paste.
Yeah.
They copy and paste. Yeah. And the benefits they're being offered, it's just copy and paste. Oh, we have a kicker and we have salad and we have water. Well, everyone has water, salad, and kicker. It's like, how are you differentiating yourself?
Yeah. Or like when they write like, you were working on a dynamic environment.
Yeah, what does it mean?
They don't have a clue what they are doing.
Yeah, what is a dynamic environment?
Exactly.
Dynamic environment is a tricky one because you say, well, we are in an agile environment where we are changing continuously and we are modifying what we are doing and we are learning in an incremental manner. Well, perhaps that's a good thing. If we are in a dynamic environment, and by that you mean that there's no vision.
Exactly. And like the boss come every week on Monday with a new idea, and then
yeah. So what do you mean? It's like, well, do you have a vision? If there's a vision in place, then everything is good. If there's not a vision in place, well. So I think that's something that is important also for people who is looking for expanding their careers, that they know that
unfortunately you only know that by experience. Like you can recall, pretty sure you can recall the good experience you have and the bad experience you have in the companies you have worked with, but that is knowledge that you gain after the fact. Because when you go to an interview, I don't know, like nowadays the interview can be like, you can do like 3-4 hours interviews, like between telephone, on-site, or online, on exercise or whatever, depending on the role. You can do like 3-4 hours interview, but after 3-4 hours, you have no idea what you are going to encounter when you enter there. So is a gamble always.
Yeah, and I think to the intuition of what you are going to encounter improves over time, but you
Yes.
need a lot of pain to understand what are you going to encounter.
Yeah.
I think that's the key thing. It's not that it's impossible to predict. And this brings me to one another interesting subject that again depends on jurisdiction, which is with your workforce and with hiring, how do you use analytics and statistics in order to improve how they work? And I've seen that, you know, again, goes back to the idea that we were discussing before. You develop an intuition on how things are going to uh, play out. And the same thing happens for the organization and happens for management. If you have enough data of what people is doing and you are in a jurisdiction where that is allowed, then you can leverage that, and then you can predict how people is going to perform over time, because at the end of the day, human beings are predictable in their behavior. So that's something that I see underused in many cases. I've been in places where there have been attempts to leverage a more KPI driven approach to how people work, and I think it can even help people. Like if you have some sort of gamification mechanism that allows you to move toward your goals in a game, like that can be beneficial in the work environment. And on top of that, to understand where you can improve, what are the kind of roles where you do not thrive, because there might be roles within a certain company that you don't thrive in, but there might be other roles that you thrive. And then if you have an objective way to measure why are you thriving, what the problems are, what can you improve, then I think that can help everyone. But I don't see that measurement of performance as a wide
No.
wide use trend. I don't see that.
No, well, the classic one is like you have goals, yearly goals that are set by your manager or your organization or whatever. And then you see it like once a year and you review your goals, if you meet your goals or not meet your goal, and what percentage and what happened and what not. But that's all. The goals can be pretty granular, like releasing feature X by this year, or a mentorship of the junior developers or whatever. The goals are pretty much free text that you can put in. But they should have a way to measure the success of the failure of the goal. But basically, that is all. And again, that's happened once a year mostly, or not at all in most of the cases, I guess.
That's an interesting thing with the goals. I think it's a double-edged sword, because I was reading not long ago about one study that they found that there was these children in a school and they were drawing. So there was a huge class of children and they were all drawing. And then, as in all good studies, they had a treatment group and they had a control group. And then the treatment group was given rewards when they were doing these drawings. So they were given, I don't know, like a candy, or they were given something, whereas the other kids were given nothing. And what happened was that when in the treatment group, when they stopped giving these rewards, either candy or verbal rewarding, saying you did a good job or whatever it is for what you're doing, they stopped drawing. And the interesting thing is that at the beginning, they were absolutely motivated about going about drawing. But then when the motivation became the drawing part, the kids, when they got rewarded by drawing, then they lost the interest. Whereas the control group kept growing. And that's an important thing to keep in mind in terms of rewarding and in terms of having metrics to measure how you perform. Because if you reward people and suddenly you give the next time the same reward, we have these dopamine peaks and then people begin tolerant to that dopamine level. If you don't give them a reward or you give them the same reward, people might have the tendency to lose interest. And the question is, do you want to have an organization? Do you want to have a team that you have to incrementally, increase
their motivation,
the reward with external factors, or, which is the other alternative, that they find motivation in the pride of accomplishing things. We are doing some.
Yes. Which is, in my opinion, from my experience, is not hard to do. Like, to motivate a team to do a good job is not that hard in my experience. It's not that hard. You can do that like pretty easy. It takes a couple of soft skills and other skills to do that, but it's easier that people may think. And those teams that are motivated that way, like, hey, we're doing a very cool job in a very cool product, and we're doing crazy stuff, and we're having fun doing it. That environment, people are motivated. If you have a different environment at that, where people are not motivated, it doesn't matter if you bring ice cream every day to the office when you go like dish by dish. Like, that can be novel the first day, but the second week everybody will say, "Oh, ice cream again."
Yeah, it's normalized. It's normalized.
Exactly.
And then dopamine. I mean, this is something, I think that's something important to understand the mechanisms, the neurological mechanisms and the psychological mechanisms of motivation. You need to have a good understanding to have a team that is truly motivated, because you might have a strong vision for a product, but if you don't communicate that in a way that resonates with your team, and that also leverage all these neurological mechanisms and all these psychological mechanisms, and also understanding within your team. And this is another component that is super, super important, to have diversity. And I don't want to go too crazy in that topic, but that's also to understand that everyone have different triggers. And so the way you motivate different people depends on their different psychological profiles. So to have an understanding that not everyone is going to be absolutely fired if someone stands there and makes a call for war and then go and battle the competition. Some people might be triggered by that, but some people might not be triggered. They might be even appalled by that. They say, no, that's not the kind of environment I want to work in.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's, I think that's something that is important to keep in mind. And it's an indirect way of leveraging technology, because usually when we think about technology, we think about silicon and PCs and things, but leveraging psychology, leveraging neuroscience, and doing things with, trying to achieve better results by using these tools is something that definitely is part of staffing and how we motivate people, how we make them, help them make their best work.
Yeah. Your light went off.
Yeah, but that happens at 11:30.
Okay. Yeah. I think that is a good segue to like your apartment is saying to you to go to sleep. I think we can wrap this up.
We can wrap this up. I mean, that was a sign
probably
of
1 hour or something.
There was a sign of the gods. So at this time, everything turns off, and I'm supposed to beginning to wind down. And that's why I have red lights. That's why lately I have red lights. It's just to help me to
I
wind
know.
down. But the white lights doesn't help. They do not help.
So that was our episode about staffing. I hope you have learned something. If you didn't learn anything, at least you will be entertained. I don't know. We hope. Just write your comment, recommend us to your friends that may want to know about this kind of stuff. I guess we see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week. See you then. Bye.